The 338Canada popular vote projection for February 16, 2025 provides a national overview of how Canadians might vote in the upcoming federal election. Conservatives lead nationally but face challenges. The Conservative Party of Canada, CPC, is leading with 42% of the vote, but with a 4% margin of error. Their actual support could range from 38% to 46%. While this keeps them in first place, their support has dipped in some regions like Ontario and Atlantic Canada. This could impact their ability to secure a strong parliamentary majority. Liberals gaining ground. The Liberal Party of Canada, LPC, sits at 29% with a 4% margin of error, meaning their actual support could range from 25% to 33%. Their upward trend, YAS, suggests growing momentum, particularly in Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada, where they have been making gains. While still behind the Conservatives, a stronger Liberal push in key battlegrounds could close the gap further. NDP losing support. The New Democratic Party, NDP, is polling at 15% with a 3% margin of error, placing their actual support between 12% and 18%. The downward trend, V, indicates they are losing traction, particularly in British Columbia and Ontario, where left-leaning voters may be shifting toward the Liberals. This could limit their influence in the next parliament. Bloc Québécois holding steady in Quebec. The Bloc Québécois, BQ, has 8% support nationally, with a 1% margin of error, meaning their actual backing could range from 7% to 9%. While this number seems low nationally, their support is concentrated in Quebec, where they remain competitive. Their ability to hold or expand their seat count in Quebec will be a key factor in shaping the next parliament. Greens remain a minor factor. The Green Party of Canada, GPC, sits at 4% with a 2% margin of error, meaning their actual support could range from 2% to 6%. While present in the race, they are unlikely to play a major role in the overall seat distribution. The 338Canada popular vote projection for February 16, 2025 provides an estimate of how Nunavut voters might cast their ballots in the federal election. NDP, likely leading the New Democratic Party, NDP, is projected to be in the lead with 45% of the vote. However, with a 15% margin of error, their actual support could range from 30% to 60%. The downward trend suggests their support may be slipping, making the race less certain than it appears. Liberal Party, LPC, gaining support. The Liberal Party of Canada, LPC, is currently at 28%. With a 13% margin of error, their actual support could be anywhere between 15% and 41%. The upward trend indicates growing momentum, suggesting they could be closing the gap with the NDP. Conservative Party, CPC, holding steady. The Conservative Party, CPC, is polling at 22% with a 12% margin of error, meaning their real support could range from 10% to 34%. They are not showing clear momentum in either direction, suggesting stable but limited support. Green Party, GPC, minimal influence. The Green Party, GPC, holds 3% support, with a 5% margin of error, meaning their actual backing could be anywhere between 0% and 8%. This suggests they are unlikely to play a significant role in the outcome of this race. While Nunavut remains an NDP-favored riding, the high uncertainty, 15% margin of error, means their lead is not guaranteed. The Liberals are gaining ground, and if the trend continues, they could become competitive. The Conservatives remain in contention, though less likely to overtake the top two parties. The Greens are unlikely to be a major factor in the race. As the election nears, shifting voter preferences could make this a more competitive race than it currently appears. The 338Canada popular vote projection for February 16, 2025 provides an estimate of how voters in the Northwest Territories might cast their ballots in the upcoming federal election. Liberal Party, LPC, leaning ahead. The Liberal Party of Canada, LPC, is currently in the lead with 36% of the vote. However, with an 11% margin of error, their actual support could range from 25% to 47%. The upward trend suggests that their support is increasing, making them the current frontrunner in this race. NDP in second, losing ground. The New Democratic Party, NDP, is polling at 29%, but the 10% margin of error means their actual support could be anywhere between 19% and 39%. The downward trend, V, suggests they are losing some ground, which could make it harder for them to challenge the Liberals. Conservative Party, CPC, close behind, also declining. The Conservative Party, CPC, sits at 27% with a 10% margin of error, meaning their actual support could range from 17% to 37%. Like the NDP, they are also experiencing a downward trend, V, indicating that they may be struggling to gain traction in the territory. Green Party, GPC, holding a small share. The Green Party of Canada, GPC, holds 6% support with a 6% margin of error, meaning their actual backing could be anywhere between 0% and 12%. This suggests that, while present, they are unlikely to play a major role in shaping the final outcome. Shifting dynamics in the Northwest Territories. The Liberals are currently ahead, and their upward trend suggests growing momentum. The NDP and Conservatives remain competitive, but both are seeing declining support, making it harder for them to challenge the Liberals. With tight margins and high uncertainty, this remains a competitive riding, and voter shifts in the coming weeks could still reshape the race. The 338Canada popular vote projection for February 16, 2025 provides an estimate of how voters in Yukon might cast their ballots in the upcoming federal election. Yukon, a tight race between Liberals and Conservatives. This riding is currently a toss-up between the Conservative Party of Canada, CPC, and the Liberal Party of Canada, LPC, with both parties in close contention. Conservatives, CPC, holding a narrow lead. The CPC is leading with 35% of the vote, but with a 10% margin of error, their actual support could range from 25% to 45%. While they are ahead, this lead is far from secure. Liberals, LPC, gaining momentum. The Liberals are close behind at 31% with a 10% margin of error, meaning their real support could be anywhere between 21% and 41%. Their upward trend, Baru, suggests they are gaining ground, making them a strong contender to overtake the Conservatives. NDP in third, losing ground. The New Democratic Party, NDP, is polling at 27% with a 9% margin of error, placing their actual support between 18% and 36%. However, the downward trend, V, indicates they may be losing voter support, making it harder for them to challenge the top two parties. Green Party, GPC, showing modest growth. The Green Party, GPC, sits at 7% with a 5% margin of error, meaning their real support could range from 2% to 12%. While their upward trend, T, suggests minor gains, they are unlikely to be a decisive factor in this race, a highly competitive race in Yukon. With the Conservatives and Liberals neck and neck, Yukon remains one of the most competitive ridings in the country. The NDP's decline further solidifies the two-party contest, while the Greens see slight gains but remain a minor player. With margins this tight, last-minute voter shifts could determine the final outcome. The 338Canada popular vote projection for February 16, 2025 provides an estimate of how voters in British Columbia might cast their ballots in the upcoming federal election. Conservatives leading, but losing ground. The Conservative Party of Canada, CPC, is leading in British Columbia with 45% of the vote, but with a 6% margin of error. Their actual support could range from 39% to 51%. However, the downward trend, V, suggests their support is slipping, indicating potential challenges in maintaining their lead. Liberals gaining momentum. The Liberal Party of Canada, LPC, is in second place at 25%, with a 5% margin of error, meaning their real support could be anywhere between 20% and 30%. Their upward trend, spikes, indicates they are gaining ground, though they remain significantly behind the Conservatives. NDP in third, facing decline. The New Democratic Party, NDP, holds 22% of the vote with a 5% margin of error, placing their actual support between 17% and 27%. The downward trend, V, suggests they are losing ground, which could impact their ability to hold on to key districts in the province. Greens holding a small but stable share. The Green Party of Canada, GPC, is polling at 6% with a 3% margin of error, meaning their support could range from 3% to 9%. While they are a minor player in this race, their support remains relatively stable. Shifting political landscape in British Columbia. The Conservatives remain in the lead, but their declining support suggests potential vulnerabilities in certain ridings. The Liberals are gaining traction, positioning themselves to pick up seats if this trend continues. The NDP is losing ground, which could weaken their hold on key districts and shift votes toward the Liberals or Conservatives. The Greens maintain a minor but steady presence, unlikely to influence the broader outcome significantly. With changing voter dynamics and competitive ridings, British Columbia remains a key battleground that could impact the national outcome. The 338Canada popular vote projection for February 16, 2025 provides an estimate of how voters in Alberta might cast their ballots in the upcoming federal election. Conservatives maintain dominance. The Conservative Party of Canada, CPC, continues to dominate Alberta with 62% of the vote. With a 6% margin of error, their actual support could range from 56% to 68%, making them the overwhelming frontrunner in the province. Their strong lead suggests they are likely to retain control of most, if not all, of Alberta's 37 federal districts. NDP in a distant second. The New Democratic Party, NDP, sits at 17% with a 4% margin of error, meaning their real support could range from 13% to 21%. While they remain the second largest party in the province, they are far behind the Conservatives and unlikely to win many seats. Liberals struggling for relevance. The Liberal Party of Canada, LPC, is polling at 14% with a 4% margin of error, placing their actual support between 10% and 18%. This suggests they will likely remain a marginal force in Alberta, with limited chances of gaining seats. Alberta's political outlook. Conservatives remain dominant, expected to secure the vast majority of seats. The NDP holds on to second place, but their support is too low to challenge the CPC in most districts. Liberals are struggling to make gains, with their support staying relatively low across the province. With Alberta firmly in Conservative hands, the real battle may be in specific urban ridings, where opposition parties could attempt to gain ground. The 338Canada popular vote projection for February 16, 2025 provides an estimate of how voters in the Prairies, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan might cast their ballots in the upcoming federal election. Conservatives remain dominant, but with a smaller lead. The Conservative Party of Canada, CPC, leads in the Prairies with 53% of the vote. With a 6% margin of error, their actual support could range from 47% to 59%. While they remain the clear frontrunners, their support has declined compared to previous elections, suggesting some softening in their traditional strongholds. Liberals gaining ground. The Liberal Party of Canada, LPC, is at 20% with a 4% margin of error, placing their actual support between 16% and 24%. Their upward trend suggests they are making modest gains, potentially positioning them for seat pickups in key urban areas such as Winnipeg and Regina. NDP losing support. The New Democratic Party, NDP, is at 19%, with a 4% margin of error, meaning their real support could range from 15% to 23%. Their downward trend, V, indicates they are losing ground, which could weaken their ability to hold on to seats in traditionally supportive areas. Prairie's political outlook. Conservatives remain the dominant force, expected to win the majority of seats despite a slight decline in support. Liberals are seeing growth, particularly in urban centers, where they may have opportunities to gain seats. NDP's weakening support could lead to lost seats, with both the CPC and LPC benefiting from shifting voter preferences. While the Conservatives remain the clear favorites in the region, the rising Liberal support and declining NDP numbers could reshape the electoral map in some districts. The 338Canada popular vote projection for February 16, 2025 provides an estimate of how voters in Ontario might cast their ballots in the upcoming federal election. Conservatives leading but losing ground. The Conservative Party of Canada, CPC, holds the lead in Ontario with 43% of the vote, but with a 6% margin of error, their actual support could range from 37% to 49%. The downward trend, V, suggests their support is slipping, which could make some ridings more competitive, particularly in the Greater Toronto Area, GTA. Liberals closing the gap. The Liberal Party of Canada, LPC, is at 35%, with a 6% margin of error, meaning their real support could range from 29% to 41%. Their upward trend do suggests they are gaining momentum, potentially reclaiming ground in key urban and suburban ridings, especially in Toronto and the surrounding regions. NDP struggling to gain traction. The New Democratic Party, NDP, is polling at 14%, with a 4% margin of error, placing their actual support between 10% and 18%. The downward trend, V, indicates they are losing ground, which could cost them seats in places like Toronto, Hamilton, and Northern Ontario. Smaller parties hold marginal influence. The Green Party, GPC, is at 4%, 3%, meaning their real support could range from 1% to 7%, keeping them a minor player in the province. The People's Party of Canada, PPC, sits at 3%, 3%, meaning their support could be anywhere from 0% to 6%, suggesting limited influence overall. Ontario's political outlook. The Conservatives are still in the lead, but their decline in support could put some ridings at risk. The Liberals are gaining momentum, particularly in the GTA, where they are most competitive. The NDP's weakening position may push left-leaning voters toward the Liberals, further tightening the race. Smaller parties remain on the margins, unlikely to influence the overall seat distribution significantly. With Ontario being the largest province with 122 districts, any shifts in voter preferences could have a major impact on the overall federal election results. The 338Canada popular vote projection for February 16, 2025 provides an estimate of how voters in Quebec might cast their ballots in the upcoming federal election. Bloc Québécois, BQ, holds the lead, but the race is tightening. The Bloc Québécois, BQ, remains the frontrunner in Quebec with 33% of the vote. With a 5% margin of error, their actual support could range from 28% to 38%. This keeps them in first place, but their lead is not overwhelming, meaning the race remains competitive in several ridings. Liberals gaining ground. The Liberal Party of Canada, LPC, is polling at 27% with a 5% margin of error, meaning their real support could range from 22% to 32%. Their upward trend, A, suggests growing momentum, particularly in Montreal and other urban areas where they are traditionally strong. If this trend continues, they could challenge the BQ in certain ridings, Conservatives within striking distance. The Conservative Party of Canada, CPC, sits at 25% with a 4% margin of error, meaning their actual support could range from 21% to 29%. While they remain behind the BQ and Liberals, their stable numbers indicate they are competitive, particularly in rural and suburban areas. NDP losing support. The New Democratic Party, NDP, is at 9% with a 3% margin of error, placing their actual support between 6% and 12%. The downward trend, V, suggests they are losing ground, making it harder for them to retain seats in Quebec, where their influence has diminished since 2011. Green Party remains a minor factor. The Green Party of Canada, GPC, holds 3% support, with a 2% margin of error, meaning their actual backing could range from 1% to 5%. They are unlikely to play a significant role in the province. Quebec's political outlook. The Bloc Québécois is still leading, but their advantage is not overwhelming, making them vulnerable in some ridings. The Liberals are gaining support, particularly in urban centers, where they could pick up seats from the BQ. The Conservatives remain in the race, competing for rural and suburban ridings. The NDP continues to struggle, with their support shrinking further. The Greens remain a marginal force, with no significant impact on the province's overall results. With 78 federal districts, Quebec remains a crucial battleground that could shift the national outcome, especially if the Liberal surge continues. The 338Canada popular vote projection for February 16, 2025 provides an estimate of how voters in Atlantic Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick might cast their ballots in the upcoming federal election. Conservatives still in the lead but losing ground. The Conservative Party of Canada, CPC, is leading with 41% of the vote, but with a 6% margin of error. Their actual support could range from 35% to 47%. However, their downward trend, V, suggests weakening support, making this region increasingly competitive. Liberals closing in. The Liberal Party of Canada, LPC, is polling at 38%, with a 7% margin of error, meaning their actual support could be between 31% and 45%. The upward trend pause indicates they are gaining momentum, potentially putting them in a position to flip key ridings. NDP struggling to maintain support. The New Democratic Party, NDP, is at 13% with a 4% margin of error, placing their real support between 9% and 17%. Their downward trend, V, suggests shrinking voter enthusiasm, making it difficult for them to hold on to or gain seats. Green Party, a minor player. The Green Party of Canada, GPC, holds 4% support with a 3% margin of error, meaning their actual backing could range from 1% to 7%. While present, they are not expected to significantly impact the seat distribution. Atlantic Canada's political outlook. The Conservatives remain in first place, but their decline in support puts them at risk of losing seats. The Liberals are surging, making this a tight race with a strong chance for gains. The NDP's slipping numbers suggest they may struggle to remain competitive in certain districts. The Greens remain a minor factor, unlikely to shift the overall race. With 32 districts, even small shifts in support could reshape the region's political landscape, making Atlantic Canada a key battleground in the federal election.